Okay, so I think test. How are we doing on volume? Is that a good level for people? Can people hear that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, wait another minute or two. Okay, I think we will get going. This level good? People can hear this okay? Okay. Thank you all for coming, especially on such a wintry fall night. In thinking about last week's presentation, I was a little concerned that I might have tried to put too much material and too much information in one 90-minute bag, and I was worried that I might have gone too fast and rushed through some stuff. And I'm going to try and be a little more conversational tonight, a little less lecture-y. But it's hard to figure out, are people here because they want to be filled with information and knowledge as receptacles and vessels, or are you here because you want to engage in conversation? And I imagine some of you are here for one level and some of you are here for another, and I'll just try and balance it and come up with a tone and a manner of presentation that people find appropriate. But on the possibility that I did rush through things last week and leave some things perhaps opaque or not completely understood, does anybody have any questions about any of what I tried to cover last week? Yes, yes.
Alderman Rohr, can you give me more background? What was the standing of the Black community? How do you communicate with the NAACP and so on?
There's a lot on Babe Rohr in tonight.
Okay.
So I think it'll answer some of the questions. His standing in the Black community was terrible. I mean, he had the second most Black constituents, but he was certainly not providing good service to them. But there's a lot of Babe Rohr in tonight, so if at the end you still need more. But his power base is he's the business agent for the Painters Union, which business agent is like the bargaining agent, the main professional person who represents the union. Yeah? Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, if I'm under the thing, thank you. So he's got a power base in the construction trades. He's either the president or the vice president of the Buildings and Trades Council. So he's got a real significant power base outside the city council. And there are times in next week's episode, there's times that he puts his union position above his aldermanic position and regards union meetings as more important than his aldermanic meetings. And that leads to some interesting developments, but that's in next week's talk. But Babe is one of the recurring figures in every week. Yeah?
So, maybe I missed this, but how was the triangle designated and picked through this?
Designated?
And picked for this urban renewal?
Oh.
I mean, was it the only place in the city that needed like urban renewal?
Well, no, well, the first urban renewal was that area to the side here, the Brittingham area.
Okay.
And then we get the triangle, and then through the next couple of weeks, there are other areas. South Madison has an urban renewal program. The east side, the Admirals, where we talked about last week, Dewey and Schley, and Williamson Street, because the east side was very depressed as well. Williamson Street and Atwood Avenue were very depressed through the late 60s.
Yeah.
It was picked for a variety of reasons. One, it's a big contiguous area in the heart of downtown that historically had been something that people, I mean, ever since the teens and the 20s, people were talking about what we could do about the bush. So there was a historical imperative to it. And there was undoubtedly some latent racism and discrimination. I don't think that was the prime motivator, but it certainly factored into it. Yeah.
Well, it was also right next to the train station, right? So you had to go through it. It was a big eyesore.
Right. It's a very important point that we've got the main avenue from the south to the Capitol. We've got the main avenue from the south to the university. I mean, these are the two, these are important highways. We've got Madison General. We've got, as he said, the train station right there. So it's a constant eyesore to people getting around. One thing, you asked a question I did not give a good answer when you asked about Schley and Dewey and why and the difference. And part of it is that area did not have the incompatible uses that the Bush had, where we've got junkyards and liquor stores and bars and things next to neighborhood houses. And Schley and Dewey will be the subject of urban renewal activity through the mid-60s. So it wasn't immune.
Maybe it wasn't as bad, but you definitely had that there. I mean, where Harlan Credit Union is, I mean,
Yeah.
there's an auto record right there
Oh.
on Willie Street.
Yeah.
You had bars intermixed and some of the, not up on Jennifer, but down below in Schley and Dewey, there's bars.
And the possibility of an urban renewal district in the east side is going to figure very heavily in next week's talk. I mean, an east side urban renewal area was certainly something that was proposed along with South Madison and then the Triangle. Anything else before? Okay. So tonight we're going to talk about 1962 and 1963. I'm not sure whether or not we're actually going to get all the way through the 60s because 62, 63, 64, 65 are really jam-packed with a lot of complex things happening at once. I'm going to try and talk them through in a narrative and present the information in a way that makes some degree of sense. So 1962 is when they start tearing down the Bush, the city, the redevelopment. Oh, I may have not even have given a proper introduction to the Redevelopment Authority. The Madison Redevelopment Authority is 5 citizens appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the council, and Norm Anderson, who would be a future Speaker of the Assembly, is a member of the Redevelopment Authority. Albert McGinnis is the chairman. He's a East Side realtor and developer. A couple of aldermen on the Redevelopment Authority and some citizens. And it is a completely independent body of the city of Madison. What they do has to be approved by the city council, but it is an independent body. It sometimes gets confusing when you say the city or the Redevelopment Authority. For the most part, their interests are the same. So, except when there's a conflict, I may use the terms interchangeably, but essentially it is the Redevelopment Authority that is doing all this. We've got the Redevelopment Authority and the Housing Authority, which is in charge of the limited amount of public housing the city has, and is in a constant fight with the Redevelopment Authority to actually build public housing. So in early 1962, the redevelopment authority gets the 2.7 million from the Urban Renewal Agency and starts tearing down the bush. 1962 is when people's houses start getting torn down, which means that the redevelopment authority is buying the houses. And this is another flashpoint between the residents and the redevelopment authority when people believe that they are underpaid for their houses. The problem is that the redevelopment authority is operating under very strict federal rules about how they do the appraisals and how they make the payments. And because the federal government is paying 2/3 of the money for the urban renewal program. And the feds are very penurious. They're watching the pennies. I found examples where there was some commercial properties in the Brittingham area, and the redevelopment authority proposed paying the people $55,000 for the 2 commercial properties, and the Chicago office of the Urban Renewal Agency knocked that back to $54,250. So this is the extent of control that the federal government is exercising over the redevelopment authority. But the people here don't know that. The people here just know, hey, I'm getting a check smaller than what I expected. The federal rules do not allow the assessment or the appraisal to take into account outside income. So if you've got a 2-flat and you're renting the top floor, the feds will not give you credit for that. The feds will not give you credit for the fact that you are an unwilling seller. So all these things that when people believe that they were being underpaid, by and large, they're right. In terms of, especially if they've got rental income or are an especially unwilling seller. But of course, the redevelopment authority has the power of condemnation, and in January 18th it starts tearing down properties. That's the first one to go on South Murray. Now, by way of comparison, here's what you can measure the purchase prices that the redevelopment authority paid against Main Street. These are real estate listings from June 1960. Lucy, that's the Patrick Lucy's real estate firm. He was the biggest realtor in Madison, and he will feature later on in tonight's episode in a heroic fashion. But just to give you an example of what prices were in 1960. You could get a new ranch in Sunset Village or Crestwood for $12,500. You could a split level in Hill Farms is $25,000-$26,000. So this is the guidepost against which to measure what they're going to pay the people in the triangle. So we're going to look at some of the properties that and the purchase prices, and it's interesting. These are the text on these. We're going to look at the 600 and 700 block of Milton Street. That's the red line there, right in the middle of the bush, of this part of the bush. Here we've got West Washington Avenue. Here's Milton Street, Francis Court, Lake, Murray, Park Street. Going to have Mound Street is coming in down here. And the railroad tracks are up there. So we're going to look at these houses on Milton Street, and the text is from the actual building inspection reports. So this gives you a sense of both what the properties were like and something about the building inspector and what they saw and how they perceived and how they reacted to the properties. The price on the left is the most recent assessment. The price on the right is the purchase price. The code by the address, SS, means the property is substandard. It means it either lacks indoor toilet with proper venting, or it lacks a central heating plant, or the quality of construction has become so substandard that it should be torn down because it's not appropriate housing anymore. The no or yes, N stands for no, Y will stand for yes, has to do with whether or not the property can be economically, whether or not it is economically feasible to restore the property. The formula was they took the assessment from 1945, divided it in half, and if the improvements if the cost of the improvements necessary to bring the property up to code were more than half the assessment from 1945, it was considered economically not feasible to bring up to code. Yeah, I don't know why they chose 1945. It must have been, yeah.
That was my question.
Okay. It may have been the standard federal rule of thumb. They went back 50, but that was what the formula was. Half the assessment of 1945, if the improvements would cost more than that, it's not economically feasible. That was the measurement. Yeah.
I know you're bringing up Pat Lucy again,
Yeah.
but wasn't that our future governor?
Yes, yeah. Pat Lucy, for those who, I should not presume, yeah. Patrick J. Lucy was lieutenant governor, and under Jimmy Carter was the ambassador to Mexico, resigned to run as John Anderson's vice presidential running mate in 1980. And he's going to figure in the civil rights story coming up later tonight. But yes, thank you.
John Anderson.
I'm sorry?
John Anderson.
No, Pat Lucy.
Yeah, he was his vice president.
Pat Lucy ran for vice president on John Anderson's ticket. So we're just going to go through some of these properties on Milton Street, and again, you can get a sense not just of the property, but also something about the building inspector by what they saw and how they described it. And you see a lot of these properties are in very poor shape. And this is through the heart of the bush. No bath facilities, poor toilet, space heaters on the second and third floor, baths, no windows or vents in the bathroom. But still, $12,500. This person could, with what they were paid for this house, they could buy a new ranch house in Sunset Village or Crestwood. It's obviously going to be a smaller house, but it will be in somewhat better shape. Again, you can see that almost all the properties in the 600 and 700 block of Milton Street are either substandard or not economically feasible to maintain. That's part of the reason, but it's part of the justification for the entire urban renewal district. Now this is a standard building, but again, it would cost too much to bring up to code, $10,900.
Wait, can you go back?
Yep.
The first floor has toilet only.
Yeah.
I thought it said one toilet only. I'm like,
Oh, no, yeah.
so does my house.
Yeah. No. But you see, I think this is an interesting description, and I think this shows some. Someone asked the question last week where the building inspectors putting their thumb on the scale to try and make things look worse than they were. Read the last sentence. I think that last sentence shows that the building inspector has a great deal of empathy and sensitivity to the properties, that he's recognizing that, even though the house itself is not in good condition, the people who live here are keeping it neat and clean. I think that tells us something about the attitude that the building inspectors were bringing to their job. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to point out. I look at it differently. I look at it as they think that because they live in these poor, these houses that are substandard, that they wouldn't keep it clean. Like there's a stereotype of if you live here, you're not keeping it nice and clean.
But he put in the record that the house is neat and clean. Which he could, if he wanted to, he could have just left it, the house is in poor condition. But he made the point of saying it is neat and clean, which we can view the same thing differently. I think it shows us a degree of sensitivity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Might be an illusion with that photograph, it does look like it's going to fall over.
Yeah.
You saw that house moved there, 1850s?
Yeah. These houses, many of these houses were moved were built in the 1860s, 1870s, a few as late as the 1880s, and moved from downtown. So they've already, gone through some degree of stress. Again, some more buildings. So one of the themes of last week was, one of the enduring themes of this era is how poorly the Housing Authority and the Redevelopment Authority play together. They don't play together well at all. They were in open warfare last year, and last episode. And so Mayor Henry Reynolds says, okay, at the very least, we've got to combine the staff. So maybe we need to keep the policy-making boards separate, but we'll combine the staffs, we'll combine the management under Roger Rutnow, we'll at least have some degree of coordination. But, which makes sense, and it's what we eventually did. But the Redevelopment Authority decides to give Roger Rutnow a pay raise as part of that new job, and Henry Reynolds doesn't want Roger Rutnow to get a pay raise, so he drops his support for the merger. Sol Levin, who would become a very well-known and beloved advocate for affordable housing, at this time is working for the plan department. He's going to be the deputy director, but when this all falls apart, he quits the city and he moves to Milwaukee, but he will be back and do good things. As to economists, okay, so finally, by the spring of '62, problems with relocation are making headlines. I mean, they start tearing the properties down in January, and people realize already by early spring, we have a problem with relocation. We're failing to provide affordable alternate housing for the people whose houses we're tearing down. In May, the Housing Authority finally wins its long effort to get the public housing units. We're talking 60 units on the Triangle and units scattered on the east side and South Madison. This is the first public housing the city has built since 1949. Right after World War II, we built some veterans housing out of Truax. In 1950, there was a referendum to build 300 units on South Park Street. That failed miserably. People had no interest in building public housing in 1950, but by 1962, 61, 62, the need for public housing is so evident and so clear and present that we finally get the 160 units that Henry Reynolds had knocked heads in order to get last week. Yeah?
You might not have said this, but how many houses total were torn down, do you know?
There were 268 structures within the redevelopment area, within the Triangle. It's about 235 were residences and 33, 35 or so were commercial structures.
May I ask,
Yeah.
in conjunction with that question, what was the percentage of absent landlords? What was the percentage of renters in the Triangle versus people who
yeah.
outright owned their houses?
We had that, I don't think I have, I'm not sure if I had that, for